So this is a kind of a unique His Vine and Victory podcast. This is my son Samuel, and we're going to do a review of the movie Young Washington. We saw the movie on Sunday, July 5th, when it hit theaters. It's a movie that went number 3 in the country that first week. And I'm beginning to wonder if it has staying power simply because it dropped in not only dollars generated. First weekend, I think it was like 21 million. And then it went to like 7 million week 2. And let me start with this question. Do you have to be a history buff to want to watch Young Washington?
I feel like a history buff would enjoy it more than, per se, someone who might know some things, not others. Um, but for him being our first president and playing a very crucial piece into having the nation that we have, I would argue no. Um, I feel like the movie does a good job of setting up what life was like for Washington, where you're not left guessing, so what's going on? Or
Right,
who's this?
right, right.
As long as you can kind of place the time factor, so this is early to mid 1700s, and have some semblance that Washington was a farmer, um, and kind of know that there's the Fairfax family that kind of play a key piece early on are rich beyond your wildest imaginations. As long as you kind of have that semblance, you really don't need to know anything else because the movie tells you exactly what's going on.
Right. So let's kind of start with that.
Mm-hmm.
So the history books, when you get in a history book on let's say colonial America,
Yeah.
and they do the George Washington piece, you find out certain facts. Okay, he was a surveyor, and yes, he became this amazing general of the military and fought in several other skirmishes, wars that were even around that period of time. But you really don't get much of a sense, other than the fact that he surveyed land. You don't get much of what made this general.
Yeah.
You you don't get the story behind what made him who he is.
And I feel like that's the interesting component about him is he's not a philosopher like Thomas Jefferson or
Right,
Benjamin Franklin,
right.
or he's not a scientist, or he's not the super well educated man. He's a barely probably elementary school level understanding of things, and then gets raised by his mom and his stepbrother.
Because his dad dies when he's 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we find that out early in the movie. There is this young Washington who has this crisis happen. His dad, his name is Augustine,
Mm-hmm.
um, dies. And he's now got his mom and his half brother Lawrence.
Yeah. His half brother. I believe that there was a couple different. I think there was. I think his mom. It's either his mom or his dad was married before.
They became a couple.
Yeah. And it sounds as if the spouse died, and
Right.
this is where Lawrence is a half brother.
Right. Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean he gets raised by his half brother who is a soldier in the military, in the British military, and is married to the Fairfax is to one of the Fairfax daughters, and owns land.
And let's talk a little bit about how society is kind of looked at that time.
The the um, the big overarching premise of what a man is there's some semblance of kind of like British royalty
Right.
or um, something to that
It,
nature.
and they have some kind of education
Shin, yeah.
they've been able to do.
They own land,
Right.
or they're rich. They've married into a rich family of
Right.
some kind.
Right.
So that kind of overarching premise is that's what a gentleman is,
Right. 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 Right.
and anybody who doesn't isn't a part of that isn't necessarily not a gentleman. Obviously, they're man, but like they're not in the elegant status of, you know, manners and,
Right.
you know, well behaved individuals of
Right. Right.
society
Right.
and whatnot.
And so with George Washington being someone who isn't part of the high social set,
Hmm.
what does his brother do?
His brother basically kind of trains, like teaches him through reading some of the books that the British were reading. There's a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior. Um, that was there. Are, I think there were. I believe that there was multiple different people who wrote varying versions of it. Washington ends up writing his own. Um, there's books from like Cato and probably some of those enlightened
Right. Right. Right.
philosophers
Right.
as well
Right.
that are kind of help shaping him alongside his brother and his mother's wisdom and teaching. There's a book, it's probably about like this thick, um, titled Mary Washington, who's his mother, and it literally talks about in very depth detail how much she had an influence on him and how much the things she taught him as a child and as a teenager and young adult influenced him to be the person that we see.
And that had to happen because Dad was now out of the picture.
Yep.
She was thrust into this position of being the mom and dad simultaneously, and that kind of resonates with me because I kind of had that experience myself. But anyways, so a Fairfax
Hmm.
sends him on a mission.
So the Fairfaxes live in what is now Alexandria, Virginia, just across the Potomac River, right across from Washington, D.C. They had a really large farm, very rich family. Matter of fact, Alexandria is called Fairfax County.
Mm-hmm.
Um, anyway, um, George Washington ends up getting in conversation with one of the Fairfaxes, and he tells him, "Hey, I heard that you have recently bought 5 million acres in the Ohio River Valley. If you don't know anything about the Ohio River Valley stems all the way from rivers like Allegheny River, the Susquehanna River, and the Monongahela, and obviously Ohio River. So this is places from Western New York, Western PA, parts of West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and it
Right,
flows
right,
right into the
right.
Mississippi.
The Ohio goes right through the city of Cincinnati. You've got Ohio on one side, Kentucky on the other.
Yeah, but
Um,
basically what the colonies called the frontier, basically.
right.
Um, so uh, the Fairfaxes have bought up 5 million acres of land in the Ohio River Valley. And he's like, I'm a surveyor. I'd be willing to go out there with a crew to help survey the land for you. So he goes up into West Virginia and then into Western PA, where now Pittsburgh is, where Erie is, into surveying the land that has been mapped out. That this is the Fairfax's um, land, and all he's doing is giving him details of the terrain
Yeah.
and mapping that out
Right.
and giving elevations of what he's got to work with.
And he comes across an Indian tribe.
Yeah, he comes across the Seneca tribe.
And of course, in Western New York, that's a pretty big deal
Yeah,
because the Senecas are here, uh,
um,
and
the
obviously had a presence back then.
yeah the Senecas are part of what is called the Iroquois Confederacy. So there are 6 nations. You have Seneca, Oneida, Cayuga, um, uh, Onondaga, Mohawk, and the Tuscarora, creating the Iroquois Confederacy. They're all located in Western New York, but because of their alliance, they were a very fierce group of people. And basically, because all the other native tribes around them spoke Algonquin, they were in constant warfare with them. In the 1600s, there was this thing called the Beaver Wars, where the Iroquois Confederacy basically went and expanded their hunting territory. I mean, I looked at a map and they expanded it from parts of Virginia into Canada, going down into PA, Maryland, and parts of Virginia and West Virginia, and going all the way over to Wisconsin.
Wow.
So they were very intriguing people, but that's very much beside the point.
So
So they end up stumbling across some Seneca that had been watching what Washington and this crew had been doing, and because they knew that Washington was an Englishman, and the Iroquois had a trade agreement with the English, so they would have been friendly with the English. Um, so they end up pointing out this fort that is owned by the French on Fairfax land. So Washington ends up reporting back to the Fairfaxes and then also to the Virginia governor, and basically stating there are French soldiers, I'm assuming, on
Fairfax territory.
Fairfax territory on land that the English have bought. And so the Virginia governor basically uh, gives Washington the title of colonel in the Virginia militia, and basically sends a small, I think it was like 200 something soldiers out towards what is now known as Fort LeBoeuf, 15 miles away from Erie, PA. And where we are, we're 45 minutes away from Erie, PA.
Right. Um, so these are events that happened literally in the neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is it fair to say precursor to French and Indian War?
Yeah, this is basically the catalyst. Washington basically meets the French at Fort LeBoeuf, and they're literally saying, "Hey, you know, we bought this territory. Why are you here? And all we're asking you is to leave. This is it." Where the French have the idea that just because you bought it doesn't mean you're living here.
Right.
The fact that we're here and you're not,
Yeah.
we own this land.
Right. They see it as we have it occupied, so it's ours.
Yeah.
and we don't care if you quote unquote bought it.
Um,
And it leads to
some conflict,
some serious conflict.
and it basically transfers the sole attention down towards Pittsburgh. They call it the Fork because Pittsburgh has three rivers that flow into one river. So the Allegheny, the Susquehanna, and the Monongahela all flow into the Ohio River, and they all meet in Pittsburgh. So there was a fort the French had called Fort Duquesne. This is where we get Duquesne University. Um, that becomes a pretty big strong point during the French and Indian War, at least for Washington. Um, he ends up creating Fort Necessity that turns him basically into a bloodbath. There's
Right.
a series of events that had happened where the,
It was poorly located.
it was poorly located. There was a conflict that happened literally before they made the fort that ended up killing a very key French general. And when the the Virginia militia surrounded, basically forcing a surrender. The French basically said that we're asking you to sign this document for treaty. You get to live, but we get to burn Fort Necessity. And it's basically stating that you shot this general and killed him,
And
even though Washington didn't.
you're given the impression that the difference in language and the translation in language between French to English created some of this potential confusion of where some of this went. And that could easily happen. I mean, French is different from English in a lot of different ways. But then it really kind of leads to the kind of the climax
Mm-hmm.
that kind of shapes Washington at this stage of his life, and he becomes this galvanizing force at what is it called, the Battle of Monongahela.
Mm-hmm. That's the last battle that they're showing in the movie. Yes, it's the Battle of Mahogany.
What happens there?
So they're pushing towards Fort Duquesne, but because of the river and because of the landscape, it is becoming kind of quite treacherous for British forces to be just marching in and doing whatever. So the French kind of picked up territory and have basically surprise attacked this British force. Um, and at this point, there's really a lot of confusion between generals. This is where General Braddock dies. Um, but there's a lot of confusion on whether there should be surrender or we stay and fight and all
Right,
this other stuff.
right,
But because George Washington says, I need to find my men, talking about the Virginia militia,
right.
he basically rides on horseback right to almost the front lines where his militia is
And
basically surrounded.
and he's basically told, he goes like, dude, you don't want to go there. I can't imagine any of them are surviving.
Yeah. And he basically fights alongside his men to meet back up with the regular British infantry. Um, and this is kind of where the famous story that some people might know about um, Indians recording that they had multiple point blank shots in George Washington, yet he came out of battle unscathed. And there's a story of when he became president, this Indian chief heard about it, went to meet him, and said, I have, had multiple shots in you point blank range, and you didn't die, and now I know that the Great Spirit has had his hand over you. And there's many accounts of George Washington coming back from battle with bullet holes in his jacket and hat, and like all sorts of crazy things, but not a scrape to his body. Um,
And it really kind of cements there the kind of character this young man was becoming.
mm-hmm,
Someone who had not just intense amounts of bravery and courage, but had an ability to lead men
mm-hmm.
into battle.
And I feel like that's kind of what the failure of Fort Necessity was. Is it was more kind of for his own sake, and believing that people would just take him at his word and not necessarily him have to prove
Right,
it.
right,
The French kind of laughed at him because he was
yeah,
21 and is like,
right.
"You're not gonna make me do anything,"
You're yeah,
you know.
you're nobody. I mean, there's scenes in the movie where can he even shave yet, kind of thing. Um, and one of the lines that I really loved in this movie was said at least twice, perhaps three times. And it's a scene where Lawrence, and whether he's teaching George how to play chess
Or they're just playing
or
the
they're
game.
just playing, and he uses the phrase,
Upon can.
"A pawn can beat the king," and it's it's a foreshadowing of this guy Washington, who is a nobody in the social system of England, um, essentially a pawn, as he becomes the general of the colonial army and will eventually uh, beat the king. Now, sadly, there's no record of that phrase being used in the Washington
Yes,
family.
I
Although,
did a little searching, and that is not that
uh,
is.
but it would have been masterful if indeed that was a phrase that had been used. So a little bit of liberties there, but I guess the thing for me, and this gets back to the fact that this appears to be a movie that senior citizens are watching, people who are older,
Mhm,
um, 60s and older, 50s and older.
mhm.
I watch it because, I like Washington and I like American history. The fact it came out the weekend of America's 250th birthday was just kind of icing on the cake for me. But this movie isn't necessarily just a patriotic movie.
I wouldn't
Uh,
even argue it is patriotic because it
it,
has nothing to do with America in the first place.
exactly, because America isn't even a thing at this point.
It's not like it's him during the Revolution. This is the
Right,
French and Indian War. This is
right,
the setup to
right.
the
The events that help cause Washington to be the general that leads
well.
the
It's also just the setup of why the colonists end up getting taxed into oblivion,
right,
and why they're pissed
right,
off with the king.
yeah, right. Okay, okay. So 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 we just we stink at teaching American history. We stink at teaching history generally,
Mhm.
and the idea that this movie went from grossing 20 million in its opening weekend and being third in the country behind Minions and Toy Story 5. Um, Dropping a couple more slots, and you're like, okay, does this Angel Studios production have some kind of staying power, like some of the other movies that they've done on, human trafficking and some other stuff? And you're like, I just don't know.
I
I don't know.
I think they do have the staying power. I feel like the biggest problem is unless you're a history buff, not a lot of people sit there and want to just watch movies on history.
Right.
Um, and I feel like part of that is you have people not tell history rightly. They make it just about people, events, and dates, and not try to storytell with history.
But let's talk about this as well. Summer 2020, spring and summer 2020.
Well, there's.
You
I was
have
going to get into
you
that. Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
let's do that.
yeah. It the catalyst changed so much of the this really bad philosophy on history that it's written by the oppressor, and it's this oppressed and oppressor mentality that, and a lot of people would argue George Washington is this evil man because he owned slaves, yet not even understanding that when he died his slaves were freed, you know um, and how his mind was changed even during the revolution on slavery.
And let's be clear. The founding the fact that Glenn Beck tells this story. The first draft of the Declaration of Independence had language about slavery in it.
Hmm.
And for the document to be approved, it needed unanimous support. And South Carolina and Georgia opposed the language on slavery. So it didn't land in the final draft. And we can sit here and badmouth South Carolina and Georgia and the past there. We don't need to do that. But the harsh reality is that the history books don't go into this kind of detail. They don't go into the detail that we had founding fathers that from the very beginning of this country wanted the slavery issue to be dealt with. And we know what kind of a track it took.
Yes,
We
led to a war.
it led to the Civil War, which led to the civil rights movement in well into the middle 20th century.
Yeah.
And and I think if it had been taught in schools that the founders, many of them wanted this dealt with, and the fact that there's this little thing called we needed unanimous approval for language before we all put our uh, what lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on the line and sign the Declaration of Independence. And okay, there wasn't unanimous support for the slavery issue,
Before a lot of them,
but
it
for
was a
crying
big deal.
but for crying out loud, stop propagandizing the kids into believing everybody wanted slavery because it's not true. It simply isn't true. And we've had this attempt at whitewashing American history, taking down statues of, go down the list from, you know, those involving the Civil War to even some of the founders because they were regarded as evil because this oppressor and oppressed mentality has taken root with critical theory, and it is this, oh, you're evil because you're white, because of something you have no ability to change, you're automatically evil. And this is wrecking our country because we were established by immigrants. Okay, the group from England comes over to Jamestown, Virginia. The Puritans come over on the Mayflower, and a lot of people can trace family history, include, in fact, you're looking at two of them, to those times and that era. Okay, I haven't been able to go all the way back to the Pilgrims, but we had family that fought in the American Revolution.
That was Go back to the Pilgrims.
So so the bottom line
Mom's
is
side of the family also goes back to the Pilgrims as well.
really
Yeah.
so so it's time to start being honest with kids in schools about this this kind of history that is part of our country, and not turning it into this, well, yeah, they all had slaves, and
And
it,
well,
make no mistake, some of them did,
let's
and I'm not trying to whitewash that.
let's be quite frank. There's two interesting facts I feel like a lot of people don't even know. Um, Most slavery was in the South. Well,
Yes.
most of it was, and those who had slaves in the North, the experience for those slaves was vastly different. Um, they were viewed with semi sort of, you're a human being. I'm not going to treat you as if you're nothing.
Right.
You're going to get education. You're going to be treated like a human individual.
Right.
Um, Kind of the way that we see it described in the Bible, quite frankly. But
Where it's more of an employment kind of
yeah, kind of
situation,
situation. Even
where
though
where
they're
where
not being paid to do it.
right,
But
right,
even in the South, there's not a lot of farmers that actually own slaves. You're talking about farms that were rich beyond their wildest dreams that owned slaves. Not every farm in the South owned slaves.
right, right.
So even that kind of shows this idea that it's big operations and
Uh,
it's very twisted individuals.
well, and we get into this argument of those white people in the colonies
Mm-hmm.
were slave traders, and we whitewash white slaves in other parts of the world,
No, yeah.
and we also whitewash what Muslims have done in the area of slavery over time.
I mean, there's the the Eastern European nations. They're called Slavic people. That means slaves.
Slave, yeah,
Um, they were so easily defeatable that whether you were a powerhouse in Europe or you were Vikings or you were um, Arabs who were trying to take over area. Yeah, I mean, at the same time, you had the 13 million Africans being circulated in between Britain and the colonies. You had you had a million white slaves from Europe being circulated between. I thought I saw like 14 or 1500 to like almost late 1800s.
We've kind of gotten a little off track from the movie,
Yes.
but I think it's worthwhile to tackle the whole issue of slavery and the events in our country in the last 6 years that have caused us to we've got to get rid of this, our history of who we are. No, we don't. And frankly, it's an insult
Mm-hmm.
that there are people that are thinking this way.
I mean, it's just intellectually lazy because it's not completely true. And then number two, that's the point of history, is to learn from it.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, there's been a lot of ugly chapters throughout American history, but there's
100%.
but there's been a lot of good ones too.
Yeah. And you'll never
Um,
find a nation that doesn't have an ugly chapter.
exactly. There is no country on the planet that has purity that is reflected throughout their span of time of existing. So, with all of that, uh, um, we are on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. and certainly thank my son for you know wanting to review this movie. Any hints on the sequel?
There is hints on a sequel. It will be called 1776, and it will be talking about his, particularly the American Revolution. I don't know if they're going to get into his presidency, but
Right,
it's definitely
right. Okay.
the revolution
So
for
so
sure.
hopefully, there was some amazing cinematography in this movie,
And
and
the
it.
coolest thing about it is it's all done out in nature. It's and build actual built sets, no CGI crap and all that other stuff.
Okay, okay.
Or it's
The fair,
all done
no,
in
no,
nature.
no fancy machines and AI doing anything.
It's all done out in
It
nature, which made it even that much more real.
so um so if Angel Studios can pull that off in a sequel, that's even better.
Hmm.
And hopefully, I would really love to see this movie get a little more traction beyond
Hmm.
just senior citizens or older Americans or people who just love history, and that there would be young people and Gen Z and millennials who realize that this is worthy of their time. With all that said, until next time, God bless.